processes and hopefully sheds light on some ways that you can enhance your own product development by giving due attention to your users and their needs. My name is Taj. I am a user experience strategist here at Quicken Loans, and I have a PhD in media and information studies. So I am a researcher by training. My career in research began about almost 8 years ago, and I'm a UXer because I love working on digital products. I have always had a strong interest in human and computer interaction. So my research and strategy work at Quicken Loans focuses specifically on our team member experiences, where it's my job to understand what our team members need and then to work to develop the easiest, most efficient digital solutions to meet those needs. I love my job and I love research, so I'm super excited to talk to you about both of those things today.
Hi, my name is Nisreen. I'm a team leader over in the UX strategy space, and I lead our consumer products. So that includes Rocket Mortgage, Rocket HQ, as well as the partnership we're doing right now with Rocket Homes. So this is all about the homeownership lifecycle and engaging with our customers at various points. And I help both mentor the team and provide them the resources necessary to bring that business strategy and architecture and research, as Taj mentioned, to life in these products. So if you're ready to get started, we're going to go through the 4 major points of the research process. We start off with some discovery work to learn what the problem is and to better define it. We explore that by going into a bit more detail, and then we test our assumptions based on our initial research. The last piece is to listen to our users and see what their response is to what we've built. So the first piece is discovery. And the key point behind discovery is that we don't want to speculate or assume what our consumers want. We want to go out there and really understand that. So the most common way to do that is actually by hosting user interviews. And actually, I shouldn't say user interviews, just interviews, because they can be with your stakeholders on the business side. They can be with subject matter experts that really understand a new feature or product that you're building. And they could be your target audience as well. And all 3 of those different groups that you may interview at the beginning of your research process provide you like the context and insight into what you should be building, and in a variety of ways, whether that's your business needs, whether that's the feasibility of what you want to build when it comes to digital products and services, technical constraints, as well as the user preferences regarding what would offer them the most value in their lives. The interview process has 4 major steps, each of which are pretty important. At the very beginning, we're defining the scope. So this is determining exactly what we want to ask our users or stakeholders or subject matter experts so that we stay on task and get some notes from those interviews that are directly applicable to the product that we are building at that time. And we use that scope to write a script that will help us through the interview process. That doesn't mean you have to stick to that script throughout the interview, but it gives you sort of a guiding light to make sure you touch on all of the points of contention that you want to learn more about. The next piece is to recruit and schedule your interviews. Recruiting is important because you want to make sure you're getting the right people on board to talk to. So if that's like a potential user, you don't want just anyone out there. Try to target your audience to the people that may get the most value out of what you're bringing to the table. The third piece is to conduct the interview. So when conducting your interview, you want to be as relaxed as possible. Try to make it informal so that the other person that you're interviewing is at ease and can respond to you appropriately. It really should be a conversation rather than a give and take. And finally, you're going to synthesize the notes you get from your interview into insights that are actually actionable when building your product. Now let's kind of talk a little bit about what an interview may look like, especially when you are responding to a script. So like I mentioned before, we want to have non-leading questions that will lead to open-ended answers. That way we're not just getting into yes or no, which a survey can provide, but we're actually identifying the story that is driving our users' lives and finding where our product fits into their life story. So one way to do that is to start off with saying, walk me through like the last time you purchased X, Y, or Z. Walk me through the last time you experienced this problem in your life. And by using that walk me through method, you're making sure that you hit every single touch point in that user's current experience. You can expand that further with follow-up questions, tackle their pain points, and follow up with there even further. What was the source of that pain point? How did they work around that? Users can be incredibly creative in how they choose to deal with their current problems today, and it can give you some inspiration into how you build your product as well. You also want to identify those really key moments. What triggered the next stage of that customer's experience? What actions did they take? Who did they talk to? What is a part of their circle? And it's all of that that will help direct the strategy behind your product. Now I'm going to pass it over to Taj to talk a little bit more about how we can use that information to go more in depth.
Thank you, Nisreen. So I will be talking about the exploration phase, and this is my personal favorite in the research lifecycle because this is where you're really dialing in on the problem and starting to set the stage for solutioning and ideation. Now, because I work on team member experiences, much of what I do at Quicken Loans is figuring out how to make tasks easier to execute. This often means taking a super close eye to what our team members are doing, how they're doing it, and looking for opportunities to make those processes more streamlined, more straightforward, and more efficient. Essentially targeting the most positive user experience possible. And this is essentially how we figure out what that experience is. So task analysis can be thought of as one component of requirements gathering. This is really where you're zeroing in to figure out what do the users need to be able to do on your platform or with your product. And there are really three main situations that will prompt me to conduct a task analysis. The first is when I need to know what the user's goals are. Those are things that we can get at through a contextual inquiry or user interviews, but when you really want to dial in on the steps in the process, how they go about fulfilling their goals. Task analysis is that method that you just pull out of your toolkit and you're like, this is it, this is what we're going with. When I need to know about roadblocks, pain points, workarounds, essentially the opportunities for us to add functionality to a product because we realize that users are having issues with these things, either because we haven't solved for them or they don't have an existing solution. Worth noting here, I think, is that task analysis can be brought into your process for different purposes. So in some cases, I'll be examining a process that happens in a digital space, like on a website, through an app, or through a combination of several of those things. And I'll be looking for opportunities to enhance an existing tool or create a new digital tool to improve the process. In other cases, you're really starting from the ground up. So maybe a tool doesn't exist. You might be examining a process that today is entirely analog. So something that hasn't been solved for digitally, and your job will really be to understand what tasks you should be accounting for in a digital solution. Now, that second case isn't as much of what we'll talk about today, but I just wanted to call it out because it is a super fruitful arena for task analysis, especially if you're into the foundational and super creative type of work. So how do we go about doing this? What are the steps that we follow for a task analysis? I'll tell you, it can vary across projects, but here is a breakdown of, I'd say, the general trends that you'll follow for a task analysis. So first, you want to identify the tasks you'll be focusing on. This will likely happen in earlier stages of research, so user interviews, contextual analyses, those are places you'll be able to get a feel for the terrain that you're treading into and to start identifying the processes that you'd like to learn more about or need to learn more about. Second, you want to schedule your time with your users. And the reason that I isolate this as a task here, as a part of the process here, is because if you've done user research, you surely know that scheduling time with participants can, come with a significant time sink, but because of the nature of task analysis, you're not asking for a little bit of their time. You're asking for quite a bit of their time. Now, in the enterprise space, that gets even more tricky because you're pulling people away from their daily duties. So I mentioned this here just to kind of highlight this is something that you want to be super mindful of. And the more mindful you are of the potential sink, the more transparent you'll be with your participants and ultimately the better experience you'll have when you do interact with them. Now, third is the fun part, at least for me. This is where you get to visit the user in their natural environment. And you'll be able to observe them as they complete the different tasks that you're interested in learning more about. This can also vary tremendously from one context to another. So some things like grocery shopping take place across multiple different settings, and will likely require some transportation as well, whereas other tasks take place exclusively at the user's desk, maybe even all within the same browser, and those are a little more easier to tackle, easier to plan for as well. So the most important thing to be conscious of here is that variability, making sure that you're accounting for whatever natural environment you're going to be observing within, so that you can have your ducks in a row by the time that you get there. Now this fourth step of prompting users to share their thoughts, their pain points, their opinions, that's a tricky one because you are in the user's natural environment. So there's a sweet spot that you want to be able to tap into between allowing the user to go about their business as they normally would, and then making sure that you're interjecting at the right time to capture the right insights without interfering with the user's flow. So also something to be super mindful of. That is a skill. I can tell you that it comes with time. The more you do this, the better you get at managing that little negotiation. And then the last step here is to synthesize the findings. So that's basically the process of reviewing your notes or your transcripts. If you're lucky enough to have, word for word transcripts of the interaction, you'll be able to, you're really focusing on identifying those meaningful trends and zeroing in on as many elements of the user's journey as you can with the data that you've gathered. So during this whole process, especially during the observation and the synthesis stage, there are two things that you really want to stay focused on. The first is what appears to be working. I mention this because we'll sometimes see that with a new version of an existing product, which ideally is released as an improvement from a previous version, users sometimes lose some of that functionality that was most important to them in the first place. So it's super important that as we attempt to devise solutions, we also stay mindful and aware of what's working well in today's environment and commit to not disrupting any elements of that process. And then second, you want to obviously zero in on the things that aren't working, because those are basically your opportunities for improvement. Those are the areas that you'll ideally be solving for with your strategy and your design recommendations. So many things can fall into this bucket. Some examples include things like making the process more intuitive, making the process quicker, and making the process easier for the user to complete in instances where you notice that that isn't the case. And third up in our product lifecycle is testing. This is where I've spent the most time in my research career. And this is where you'll really get to understand a couple of things. So first off, how well did you pick up on your user's needs in the first place? And it's not meant to be a test, it's just a self-check, right? So going in, seeking that constructive criticism and checking your biases at the door because you might be attached to some of the solutions that you've developed is super important here. This is also a time when you're going to realize that there can be quite big differences between what a user says they're going to do with your product versus what they actually do when it comes time to interact with a wireframe or a prototype. So this is where you're going to be collecting those insights that allow you to refine and iterate on solutions that you've already developed with your design team. And so why do we do this and when do we do this? There are a few ideal times to bring a usability test into your product development process, most commonly when you're looking to uncover problems early in the design, or in early designs, and then to identify opportunities for improvement as well. But also to target general insights surrounding your users' behaviors and preferences. And one thing that we tend to do as researchers or strategists when we present findings from a usability test is to focus on the opportunities for change. But it's equally important that we continue to highlight user needs and to maintain that shared understanding of the user's experience as it continues to evolve. And that includes positive things as well. So to anyone conducting this kind of work, I encourage you to stay conscious of user sentiment and to continuously share those nuggets with your team so you don't lose any elements of your understanding of what it is that they're actually experiencing start to finish. And then there are three main elements of a usability test, and really three things that differentiate a usability test from other types of user testing. So there's a facilitator, that's typically me, who is a researcher or a strategist guiding the participant through the test. And then there are tasks, and this is really that defining factor of the usability test. So the tasks are what you're looking to examine and what you're looking to adjust in line with the user's needs that emerge throughout this test. And then there's the participant who ideally is a realistic user of your product. I would caution against using with unrealistic users of your product. And this is a person who completes the tasks as the facilitator observes and probes, and essentially makes sure that the process is moving along as smoothly as possible. So how do we do this? There are so many best practices for us to tackle here. I could personally spend all day talking about all the intricacies of usability testing. So I will lead by inviting anyone who'd like to chat more about this process to reach out to me, get in touch. In the name of time, I'll try to make it through this as quickly as possible, but it will be hard. So planning the test, that's where you are outlining your target insights. You're thinking really critically about the best way to target them. So in a usability test, you're walking your users through tasks, which usually requires quite a great deal of context setting. So this is where you're going to be mindful about how you're going to be setting that context. How many tasks are you going to be able to fit into one session? And what specific insights are you targeting? This is typically where I put my script together to ensure that I'm maintaining consistency across sessions. Like Nisreen said, the script is more of a guide, but it is super important to have one to ensure that your data across sessions and across participants is valid. Next, once you've outlined all the details of your test, you'll be ready to recruit. We've talked about the time sinks of recruiting. So finding a type method here that works for you and making sure to replicate that method once you nail it down. Replicating it across different studies is probably going to be the approach that suits you best. I've used scheduling tools like Doodle and Calendly, and those have been really helpful to me in the past. So those are just a couple of recommendations of different things that you could bring into your process. Preparing materials is such an important part of this. So whether it be wireframes or prototypes, paper or digital, you're ideally going to want to have your materials a couple days in advance to make sure that your script, your materials, and your plan for context setting are all aligned. So this is where great relationships with your designers is really going to play a huge role, because they're going to be just as invested in making sure that you're ready to go into that test. Next, you'll work on setting up the environment, which can vary a great deal based on, are you conducting it remotely? Is it in a digital environment? Is it in a physical environment? So, when I'm in a digital space, I need to make sure my screens are where they need to be, my different materials are where they need to be, making sure that my recording mechanism is set up, everything that I need to extract insights from that session essentially is in place. In a physical environment, it's more a matter of securing the space, equipping the space with cameras, microphones, so that other people can watch in and observe the session, making sure that I have a laptop for note-taking and a laptop for the participant to use, and generally ensuring that everything is running smoothly. So one important thing to call out here is to always pilot. I don't have it listed as a step, but between 4 and 5, I will always make sure to pilot to make sure that I'm good on time, my script makes sense, and all of my equipment is functioning the way it's intended. And then comes the fun part, is conducting the actual test. So if you've spent enough time and effort, or let's say do time and effort in steps 1 through 4, this should be easy breezy, but there are some important skills I'll call out as things to stay conscious of at this stage. So active listening is super important here. If you miss something, always make a note of it. Make sure to circle back to that with the participant. There's only so much that you can keep track of at once. So little notes to yourself, just as reminders to go back and probe in a certain area that you weren't able to extract all that insight. And then most importantly, if the participant states an opinion or a preference, always remember to drill into the why. You need to improve that understanding of their reasoning and their mental models and share that with your team, because that's the justification for every decision that you make, is the user's why. Now in the data analysis stage, you're looking back to your notes, possibly your transcripts, you're looking for trends and themes surrounding each of those insights that you outlined up front as your goals for this round of research. And then when it comes to reporting the results, you're taking a more critical approach to those findings. So you're really looking to tell a story. You want to highlight the pertinent needs of your user and inspire stakeholders to devise solutions targeting those needs, or even to care about those needs in the first place. So that's where you're really transitioning from more of a dry data standpoint to a storytelling standpoint, where you're developing this shared understanding. And now I am super happy to pass back to the wonderful Nisreen so she can give us a deep dive in the listening stage.
Thanks, Taj. So yes, in the listening stage, this is all about verification in the same way that usability testing looks at how well a product has performed once it's been designed. This is taking it one step further and looking at the behavior that's happening for larger sample sizes. So let's take a little of a deep dive into user analytics. This essentially distinguishes what people do from what people say they do. So in the discovery stage and in the you're really asking like, hey, how did you do this process? Now we're actually seeing like, how did they go through this process using the design that we've built out? And so as part of taking a deep dive into user analytics, you really need to be familiar with a certain funnel flow. And so that funnel essentially goes through 6 major stages. And I'll use an example to help walk us through it. So let's say that you're in the market to purchase a kayak. It is summer, you want to go out on the lake. First, you might just have general awareness, like, yes, I want this thing. So when it's mentioned, my friend says, hey, I got a kayak from this company and it was awesome. Someone else says, I had got this kayak and I hated it. You're getting more attuned to what people are saying relevant to the purchase decision you're about to make. And then when you're getting more serious about your decision, you decide to self-educate. Let me research what this company's kayaks looks like. Do I want a touring kayak? Do I want more of a speedy kayak? Am I going to be in deep water or shallow water? Am I going to fish? All of that is part of the education piece. And both awareness and education has a place in our digital experiences and our digital products. We provide content and different designs that help assist the user through that general awareness piece and that self-education piece. It's why here at Quicken Loans, we have the publishing house to provide more content around mortgages, refinancing, etc. The third piece is engagement. So this is the third stage. And that means that you've actually went through and started clicking through different kayaks. You know, you're engaging with the content, you're actually looking to purchase. And there's a flow associated with that as well. So that would be like the product page if you are looking at different kayaks. The conversion piece is once you've decided that this is the company you're going for, and you start, let's say, favoriting items. So this is an indication that you are definitely going to purchase from one particular supplier. You just haven't quite made the purchase yet. You're narrowing down your options. You've been converted and persuaded that that is the best option for you, but you haven't hit that checkout process yet. That happens at the next stage, which is revenue. And so this is kind of the first 5 stages of getting introduced into a new product line. The last piece is recurrence. We're hoping to build up loyalty so that people come back again and again. Now, this is often used in the product marketing space to better understand where exactly we lose consumers along the way. And so between each of these stages, there is a certain drop-off point. Lots of people may be aware of what you're offering, but fewer are willing to actually educate themselves and get more involved into that. And even fewer are going to actually engage with your product. So if you look at those drop-off points, they can tell you where in your flow you are losing customers. At what stage have you actually lost customers throughout your flow? And once you have an understanding of where the biggest drops are, you know where you need to focus in terms of setting up your next research session. So if you click through, in order to start developing a plan and how you're going to actually tackle that, you have to go beyond just the numbers. So the numbers have told you exactly where to look. Now it's a matter of digging deeper. So this is about setting up your next iteration of research. So let's say it was in that awareness phase where you had the most drop off. Lots of people are aware of what you provide, but they're not particularly interested in learning more about it. How can you increase leads in that space? Well, let's map it back to the actual experience our users have with that product. We call this a customer journey map. And so we look at the various touch points where they touch our experience, and we see how we can improve those portions of the user flow. And so like I said before, I just want to reiterate, conversion analytics is all about the when. And it's that customer journey map that outlines real life events of how the customer feels as they go through each of those different stages of the funnel that tells us the what, how, and why. And it's at that point that we go back to the discovery phase and actually have the chance to learn more and dig deeper into the narrower piece of the digital experience that we're building out. So thank you very much today for listening to a couple of the most common user research methods that our team pulls out of our toolbox. I guess at this point we can open it up for questions.
Thank you so much, ladies, for sharing that and sharing your presentation with us too. And if you notice, folks, on the presentation, you do have Taj and Nisreen's email. So if you do have any questions, we don't have any questions that came through our Q&A. But if you do have questions, please reach out to Taj or Nisreen. Use their email.